This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, and SAE Institute Nashville. You're hearing my voice right now mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes below, and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave us a comment. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
And I used to dream of being able to do things that I get to do now, you know. What I, would say that I've gotten from all that is that I started my musical career in the early 70s. So the 70s and 80s, I really do feel was a golden age of recorded music for a number of reasons. And analog and everything, the consoles, generally things didn't really break down. I mean, you had to make sure that you had tape heads were cleaned. You had to make sure that you aligned, tape recorders correctly. But you didn't really have computer processors that broke down and all that. So you could go through and record and mix, and it was less downtime.
Yeah. Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Native Instruments supercharges your music production with Complete 15 featuring Contact 8 new machine hardware integration and cutting-edge synths, samples, and effects. Contact 8 now gives you the chords and phrases tool for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument for blending organic and synth textures. Plus, Machine 3.0 is here, giving you seamless control over Native Instruments gear and the latest NKS-supported hardware. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Bob Bullock, an acclaimed engineer and producer who began his career in Los Angeles training under legends like Humberto Gatica, Reggie Dozier, and Roger Nichols. He quickly worked with top acts such as The Tubes, Art Garfunkel, REO Speedwagon, and Chick Corea before moving to Nashville, where he has earned over 50 gold and platinum credits with artists like Shania Twain, George Strait, Reba McEntire, Hank Williams Jr., with over a 40-year career spanning engineering, producing, and artist development. Bob has worked with legends also like Kenny Chesney, Loretta Lynn, and Keith Urban, while also focusing on independent artists worldwide. He now shares his expertise through teaching at Belmont University, SAE, and other institutions. Bob's also been a guest on the podcast previously for RSR510 and RSR369. So please welcome back Bob Bullock to Recording Studio Rockstars. Bob, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am ready to rock.
It's great to have you here, man. I think when we've done our interviews in the past, you were joining us over the internet remotely, and now you get to be here in the studio. In fact, this was the first time you had seen my studio coming in.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm going to have to make one modification.
Yeah.
My career now is, I'm going to have to update. It's been like 50 years.
That's awesome.
So I have to update the bio, but otherwise.
That's great. That's great.
We have very similar control rooms, Carl Tatz design, and I'm a big fan. He just, won a tech award at NAMM this year. But you and I have the same monitoring system also, with our Carl Tatz rooms. So.
Yeah, and I really love it too. Yeah. And Carl's, famously makes our studios look similar, pretty similar.
Yeah. Yeah, it's its own look, but it's very efficient. Everything has a purpose for the acoustic. As soon as you walk in the rooms, you can just tell the difference. And the imaging and the monitoring is just over the top good. So
Carl came in and remodeled my studio, and it went from Funky Town, me trying to figure out how to put a pair of NS10s up and, where do I put the subwoofer and stuff like that. And, trying to adjust levels to, and enjoying that and getting, some great results from that stuff, but also switching, then he came in and shot it out. And now it's like, it's accurate is probably the best way to describe it. And it's a totally different experience for me. And I will say that one of the things I love about it is it makes it a lot easier for me to mix, particularly even tracking, I can really hear the difference between sounds, and just making sure that things sound great. So when did you do your room in the redesign? Because mine's, I don't know, 4 years old or something like that.
Well, I've got you beat there. Carl's actually built three studios for me over a 25-year period.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So the history, I'll try to not make this too long, is I was working at Carl's studio called Recording Arts. All through the 90s.
Where the fridge was famously full of sodas from around the world that were all turned exactly the right direction.
Yep. And it was and everything worked, and it was all, it was always really, nice when you came in. And so he built the studio in a home, and the imaging for the monitoring, everything was really great. It was one of my favorite places to work. Well, when Carl decided to take what he had learned and was doing with a home space and, go out to, do it as a building studios, remodeling studios, I think mine may have been the first one he did, but it started off, I wanted to just have a really great listening environment in my home. I wasn't really thinking of studio. This was probably in 2000, 2002, something like that.
Yeah.
So he designed in my dining room, ended up calling it the dining room. He designed a Carl Tatz, studio environment. And I think he had already started his Phantom Focus, trademark.
Starting to brand it.
Yeah,
and all that.
The branding. And so I had that for a few years, and it started off just being a place to listen to what I was working on at other studios and take notes. Then I ended up moving it upstairs, took a bonus room, and Carl came in and built a studio that we called the Dream Room. And that was kind of a full-blown mixing environment. So I had that for a number of years. And then fast forward, I guess it's probably been 11 years now. My fiance and I bought a home, and I took the upstairs and had Carl come in and design and do a room that is definitely the best of the three. It was an evolution, and they were all great. I was happy with all of them, but the one I'm in now is the best. Just the dimensions of the room, everything worked really well. And I guess, with the evolution of gear, I think, some of the things just made it a better environment. And so I couldn't be happier, absolutely love my mix room. And trying to think, there's really nothing else.
What do you call your mix?
Oh, this is called Cool Springs Mix. I'm out in Franklin. Cool Springs.
Nice. Well, let me see. I'll see if I can screen share what we got here too, just so that everybody can see it too. Of course, we're audio podcast and video, so we'll have to verbalize everything that we look at so that people can know what we're seeing. Okay. So this is sort of like landing page for the website here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then you can see the room in there, but I think if I go over to
there are some photos. It all needs to be updated.
Tab, I think you've got some great. Do a better job of clicking on that. Okay, here we go. Now you can see what the room looks like. And it's really
That's just my little lounge area there. Really, that's just. It's really just the control room.
Yeah. There we go. I thought maybe I could move it around.
Couldn't be happier. In fact, from that picture, about the only thing that's really changed is I have a different control surface, the SSL
UF8.
UF8.
Yeah.
All that, their
Do you have
whole
the
system.
UC1 also, the EQ? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you saw that's what I've got down in my studio too.
Yes, yeah, and I love it. Absolutely love it. So
yeah, me too.
That's set right in there actually. So that's about the only change. Everything. Well, I actually have new monitors now. I do have to update that. Those are Dyne Audio M1s, and I love them. But I went ahead and upgraded last year to Carl's Phantom Focus monitors that look similar, and they have the same basic characteristics, but he kind of took that to a new level also.
Yeah, I think I have the HD 1000s or something like that, and they sound great. They sound great. I mean, I haven't done iterations of the same speakers, so maybe I'd have more insightful opinion about it, but they just sound awesome the way they went in. I had heard it in, he had that studio, the upper deck that he had built. And then I guess they up and sold their house and had to tear the studio down and move to a new city. And so they became available. And I had heard them at the upper deck. Carl invited me to come, give it a listen. Mm-hmm. He's smart about that. When he builds a beautiful new studio, he's like, hey, come by and check
I visited
it out,
many. Yeah.
And it's always fun to do because then you go here and you're like, man, this sounds great,
Yeah, my observation, I mean, I've been such a fan of what he does, is my observation of all this is that anytime you get a new monitoring system, it takes some getting used to.
Yeah.
Because it's always different. Carl Studios have different monitors to, different owners, their taste, but there's always a consistency as far as the imaging is quite good.
Yeah.
The clarity, all that is what he's really, mastered. I have visited, most of the studios, especially everything kind of locally around the Nashville area. And I was always a fan going way back years ago to the Dyne Audio M1 speakers. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my flavor. But even rooms that I visited that he did that used different monitors, they still were similar. Okay. When he came up with his own design for the Phantom Focus, to me, that even kind of took the clarity and imaging just to another level. And it still takes a little getting used to. Even when I went from my M1s last year to the Phantom Focus system, it was a little bit of I have to get used to how these sound.
Right.
But then it all comes together. And the real benefit, though, as you said, is anybody, in my opinion anyway, anyone that spends enough time in front of speakers and is mixing can end up getting great sounding work, because you can do trial and error,
right.
And you can say, well, I need to do this with the bottom end. Maybe the mids need to be kind of more at this place, and you sort of work around, whatever you need to. So eventually you can get there.
Yeah.
But a system like this makes it so much quicker and more efficient that you can trust what you're hearing.
Yeah. So that's a couple of things, and we may have talked about this on our previous episodes because we certainly talked about your studio, and we both had the Phantom Focus system at that point. And shout out to you, Carl.
Yeah.
If you're watching. So one of the things that really struck me about the low end was in recording. So like to sit with a bass in the mix position and dial in a bass sound and play a bass part, I was like, wow, I can really tell what this sounds like right now. It feels like I can tell what I'm doing in the context of how do I want this sound to be in the mix itself. So that's really fun. I was used to sit with the bass in the back of the room, which is still fun to do because you get more bass.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a creative process and everything, but those elements give you more confidence in your decision making, and I definitely find that when I record stuff that I feel confident about, that the mixing process gets simpler, because it's not a repair process then, it's more of a fun, balance process.
Yeah.
So, I really couldn't be happier. And, I think we talked a little earlier, I guess was not on the show, but, just the efficiency of the computer systems and everything now is made it kind of more fun again, because we have enough processing power that we don't get stuck on things like we used to.
Yeah. It's a funny that you bring that up, because I was Rockstars, you wouldn't know that by watching this, hopefully, but I've already had to start and stop a couple of times for a couple of quick edits.
Yeah.
And I have a system for doing that when I do a podcast, but if I have to do it a lot, it's disrupting. But the point I want to make is, I agree with you. I think that it's so wonderful to be able to live, to make records within a computer where there's like all this possibility for what you can do. You can route things, you can use plugins, you can process things, you can edit things like crazy. You can, wrangle a multitude of tracks together in ways that would have been so much more difficult to do in the analog world. But at the same time, I also feel like I actually do more maintenance in digital world than I did in analog world in a lot of ways. Like, doing this, sit down and you press go, and then the screen turns off, and then the Wi-Fi drops, and then something else, and you're just like, pulling my hair out. So do you find that at all? Have you ever felt like the digital process has been, there are more times where you might sit down and it's just not going to go today, even though it was just working before lunch and now it doesn't work? I do remember those with my tape machine. I remember it in analog very well.
In fact, I'd say though today it's probably getting better, much better. There was a period of time, going from analog for me, say maybe going from the mid 90s, there was a period of time that it got really tough, the transition of all the different recorders we were using for digital and everything, ADATs, radars that there was so many pieces to the, the evolution of the transition, Pro Tools. And, I found that to be very difficult because everything was very time consuming, and different machines didn't talk to each other well, and you went to different studios. Yeah.
Restarting the computer, you needed 15 minutes or something.
Yeah. A lot of downtime, a whole lot of downtime. And that wasn't a very fun period. Now I'm feeling for the first time in the last few years that the computer processing is, much faster. So even my Mac Mini at my studio is actually more capable than what I put it through, which is good. For a long time, I had to freeze channels and do things that it couldn't keep up with what I wanted to do. For me, going back from the analog days though, I've embraced the evolution of technology in a lot of ways, even though, like I said, it was a struggle for probably about 10 years that I feel now is maybe, smoothing out. But, I used to dream of being able to do things that I get to do now, But what I, would say that I've gotten from all that is that, I started my musical career in the early 70s. Okay. So the 70s and 80s, I really do feel was a golden age of recorded music for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
And analog and everything, the consoles, generally things didn't really break down. You had to make sure that you had tape heads were clean. You had to make sure that you aligned, tape recorders correctly. But you didn't really have computer processors that broke down and all that. So you could go through and record and mix, and it was less downtime.
Yeah.
Even today, to elaborate a little bit, I do find there's days I go in my studio and I spend the day just doing updates and then figuring out why something doesn't talk to something else.
And I don't mind doing some of that, when it's on my time, but it's frustrating when you do sessions or you try and run something and you're working with a client or you have a guest come over as a podcast guest, and you're like, you want to be ready. You want to hit the go button. Right. It's like, I was thinking about it. It's like setting up for tracking sessions.
Mm-hmm.
You want to, you do the setup beforehand, and then when you sit down to do it, you want it to work now.
Oh yeah. It's all on the front end.
Yeah.
For me. And so I've kind of, I guess assessed how did I get here? Like what's my, way of working and everything based on, my history. And honestly, I still record music very much the same way I learned when in the early 70s.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot that's different other than the fact that we're generally using Pro Tools instead of a tape recorder, an analog tape recorder.
Now, do you do full tracking and stuff at your studio?
No, I
so
don't.
it's more of a control room situation.
It
do you do
is.
overdubs there sometimes?
I can, and I honestly don't even do that's just like a last resort for me if I need to do a background part or something and do it at my house. I do really most all my recording. Maybe now I could even say all my recording at other studios.
At Isotope, mixing just got even smarter. Introducing the new Isotope Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia, designed to transform your sound with intelligent processing for dynamically precise saturation, reverb, and delay. Plus, Neutron now features 3 new modules and an upgraded AI-powered mix assistant to help you get killer mixes with ease. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off the Catalyst series, Neutron, RX, or any of Isotope's incredible plugins at isotope.com. Do you have any favorite spots that you find yourself at over and over again in Nashville for different
not.
I know. We don't necessarily want to. I mean, I don't know if anybody deserves favors on the podcast or what, but if you don't want to play favoritism for studios, what I mean.
Well, I guess the honest way to answer that for me is I'm mostly producing music, these days. I'm mostly the stuff I'm doing that I'm engineering, I'm producing. On occasion, I'll mix, for people or maybe get called to do a tracking date. But for me, my favorite studios, there's a number of them. It's casting. I mean, that's what that's my way of describing, how I produce and what goes into that. It's like directing a film, and it's also being the casting director. So if a band or an artist comes to me and they would like me to work with them, or maybe somebody even wants me to track for them and they're producing and they want my opinion, I try to assess like what studio I think has the best vibe. Because there's a lot of great studios. So there's not even like one place that I only work at. And, sometimes it's the particular equipment. It might be a piano that's there, maybe a studio that offers Hammond organ and, Wurlitzer piano in-house, maybe sometimes one that has an in-house drum kit. If it's a small group, maybe don't need as large a room. Maybe we can save a little money on the budget with a smaller room. If it's a large group, I want to have plenty of, not necessarily separation to say, but the ability to record a lot of people.
Enough space. I mean, if you've got group vocalists too and things like that, you need very specific spaces. I've squeezed a lot of sound out of my little studio down there. I think I had a 20-person?
Oh, wow. Okay.
There's a stage cast for a musical downtown Nashville, and we had, a bunch of people in once doing vocals, and I was like, it's like trying to figure out how do you record that, It's like I think I just put one U67 in the middle of them and then did some overdubs and kind of faked it out, But it's nice when you're in a space where you can set things up properly too. If you got a large ensemble, you can mic it up that way.
Yeah, I mean, you always have to do what you have to do, and that's part of the challenge, and that's what kind of keeps it exciting, I think. But that's kind of how I go about choosing studios. I mean, is it a problem if I mention some names? Because I do have some favorite studios, but there's a lot.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, like for example, last year I produced 5 projects and did 2 of them at Insight Studios in Franklin. And that, the basic tracking, we do some overdubs at some other places for different reasons. But that studio was the right vibe and everything for those projects. Most recent project I did was we cut the tracks at Curb Studios. In fact, I'm promoting them today.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, really, great tracking room. But it was.
I think I was there when they put in a new API.
Desk, it's a fabulous room, but it's very different than say the Insight. But it was right. It was right for the project. The artist's name is Bucky Hurd. most recent project I produced. And then other projects that I did, one was with High Mountain Breezes last year. Insight Studios in Franklin was the right place for that.
What's Insight like? How would you describe it?
Well, it currently has a big SSL in it, which I'm fond of, but it's a very large room, So, and it's a lot of good visibility for everyone. Great piano, great lounge. That's part of my criteria, for everybody. But no, it just had a good vibe for these projects. So, an artist named Tony Lynn Starr. Actually, I did 3 projects there last year. High Mountain Breezes was a record. Did 2 records with them, but we did the one we did this last year. We cut it at Insight. Tony Lynn Starr is an artist I produced, an artist named Jack Dell. So I did all 3 of those. We did the tracking there. I produced a band out of Colorado called Union Gray, and we cut all that at the Sound Kitchen, which right now is actually down for remodeling.
Right, they're doing a big turnover thing.
But that was the right vibe, honestly, for that band. It was more of a self-contained band situation, and it was a good vibe to just stay at Sound Kitchen for that. In fact, I think we did everything for them there. And then Bucky Hurd, most recent project I produced, Curb was the right place. But, I've, done a lot at just every studio, Starstruck Studios, Sound Kitchen, Blackbird. I mean, there's so many great studios.
What about the Tracking Room? Was that a place you worked at?
I did, and I understand that it's reopened again.
I've heard that.
Yeah. Keith Urban purchased it, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true. And I'd like to work there again. I mean, it's a vast studio.
It's a big space.
It's huge. And I did stuff back in, gosh, I don't even remember when they built it, but the early days of them building it, even before the Shania Twain stuff, I think it did some Floyd Kramer stuff there where we had a whole orchestra and rhythm section all live, and that was pretty exciting. That was a room like Ocean Way. Ocean Way is another one. So
I mean, that's a place where you could have an orchestra in a room, but you could also have the drums could be in an isolated room that's plenty big enough.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and the same thing at the Big Boy at Sound Kitchen, which right now is just being remodeled. But yeah, so I guess there's no quick way to answer that. There's a lot of fabulous studios, and I just find that I try to make that part of the casting, just like producing an artist and what musicians to bring into this band. Mixing has always been a thing where sometimes work with someone, they go this would be a great project to mix on a API desk. Or an SSL desk, or they're all flavors, and I've really always liked the challenge, I guess, of being freelance and trying to change it up so my work isn't the same.
What do you think is for somebody who might be curious? How do I put myself in a position of production where people want to work with me as a producer, and I can go to choose, the cast like you described? I can choose an engineer in a studio to work with and, do all that. What are some ways that people might consider as a path towards that?
Well, it's all trust, really, Lidge. I mean, in my early days, I was very fortunate. In my early days of breaking into the music industry, I like a lot of us. I mean, people my age, it's kind of almost really funny how common it is. You say, what got your interest in the music business? And if you're in my age group, you say the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Right.
I mean, it's just, it's the truth, I was one of them. My eyes got big and I went, I want to do that. I was like 11 years old, So I started playing guitar, and so I played in bands, and I wanted to be a rock star, and, was in bands. And then for me, it really, in my teens, I felt that I wanted to learn more of all the technical stuff and everything, So growing up in Los Angeles, I was able to start going to studios, and I would find that people would let me in the door and let me watch and, just see. And so I had the good fortune in my early career working like under so many greats. I worked at Radio Recorders in Los Angeles and ABC Studios, then later Kendon Recorders. They were all pretty famous studios. And so I got to work under all these producers and engineers and musicians, but everybody that were very much masters of their craft, and got to watch them. And what I probably learned the most was just how to work with people. Like everybody had some talent. Some people were more technical than others. Some, were just great mixers, great recording engineers, great musicians. But I learned, it's getting someone to trust you.
Right.
And so as I was starting to try to get off into my own career as an engineer first, and then later producer, I realized it's about the people I work with, me earning their trust.
Yeah.
So if they trust me, and I say I really think that we'd be best served to mix at this studio, all right, because it's always a team thing. It really is. It takes a village to make a record.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think it's just as I started developing that, I've got to study, and I've got to learn, and then I've got to earn the trust of people and say trust me, I think I know who we need to get and all that. Then that's how you build relationships. A lot of the people I work with today are relationships that go back 40 years, 30 years, I guess even probably 50 years now. But
yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a lot of it is just is the ability to gain trust. Even mixing, you could, if you could do a really good mix for someone you think is really quality, if they don't really trust you,
right,
they're going to second guess everything you're doing because they're not sure that you know best. The more you have their trust, the easier it gets, because I don't dictate what I do. I mean, if I mix something for someone, I'm the first one to say, hey, if you hate where I'm going with it, we'll start over. I mean, it's I'm here to serve you. But if they trust me, then it really gets a lot easier, because they figure, well, he's been doing this a long time. He probably knows what he's doing,
When it comes to production, if somebody, for example, is, I come out of this sort of indie world of you have to wear all the hats at once.
Mm-hmm.
And there are probably a lot of listeners that are coming up that way too. And yet you may want to expand upon that and start stepping into a particular role. You're either just mixing, or you want to just do some production like that. What are there any insights into how you, like, for example, let's say you have a day rate as a engineer, or you have a mixing rate as a mixer or something like that. What could we know about how to bill for production, and how to make that a professional path as far as income? Oh
boy.
I mean, maybe it's too wide open of a question to even answer, but
yeah.
Are there any, basic kind of fundamental ways to look at it?
Yeah, that is kind of a big thing to try to dissect. I guess if there's any kind of standardization at all, it would be like, as a recording engineer or mixer, as a recording engineer, you might say, well, the going rate with my peers and people in my skill set is about this much per hour or per day.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of times producers are hiring out the engineering and everything. So then, of course, they need to be compensated or have some kind of an upfront thing. So there's going to be a production fee for them. Okay. And that could be all over the place too. I mean, it could be, per side. In numbers, I'm saying things that really are just kind of vague, I guess, but it could be, $1,000 per song or $5,000 per song just for the producer.
Right.
It could be $200 a day or $1,000 a day for the engineer or whatever. Musicians, if you hire musicians, you usually have a little bit more to go on if you go through the union, because there's a union structure. And even that has like 5 different scales depending on what you're doing.
Oh, wow.
So you just kind of have to put together like what, if you want to do, this is the way I look at it. If I want to do a project with someone, I have to look at how much money, what their resources are in order to get from the beginning to the end of the project.
Right. And it might be completely different working with a project that is, funded by a label versus an independent project. Right. Versus a project that exactly where the end is going to be versus a project that like this is a big experiment to see how it goes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There's so many variables, and so for me, there's some projects that I have to pass on because there's just simply not enough resources to do it. But I have the ability, and this is where you're saying about if you're wearing several hats. I have the ability to produce and engineer. So if I want to kind of couple that into like one fee to make it more viable, I can, I'm not trying to really compete with anyone, but it's like, there's a studio I just cut some tracks at called County Q. That's, right.
Great spot. Yeah.
Great spot. And County Q has always kind of had, they built a really good legacy of, everybody involved in the studio brings something to it, so they can put together tracking dates, and Paul plays drums, and, they can engineer and all that, so they can do it for a price and kind of make it work. So that is the benefit if like you're the producer and you're the bass player or something, you can help. But it really is just so all over the place. I absolutely am a fan of trying to get projects that there's enough resources to be able to go in and be creative and not try to rush through things. So I'm always lobbying for, it's just like building a home or something. I mean, you what's it cost to build a home? Well, what do you want?
Exactly.
1 bedroom, 5 bedrooms. Do you want a pool? Do you want, 3 baths? Do you want, is linoleum okay, or do you want Spanish tile? And so creating records is really no real blueprint for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's cool to hear your answer too, because still homes can be different price points, but still might have some basics like, well, you're going to need a foundation, you're going to need probably going to need a kitchen, a bathroom. Our resident fly is back from yesterday.
Oh, that's funny.
So we've named him Bruno or Brundle fly.
Brundle, okay.
Yeah. Do you remember that? You remember that reference?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah. I'm waiting now. I haven't mentioned it yet on the podcast, so drop it in the comments and let us know who Brundle fly is. Dreaming of a career in audio or the entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs where you'll learn on professional-grade gear with industry pros, learning through real projects, not just lectures. Explore studio production, live sound, audio for film, and a whole lot more. Or take the entertainment business program to learn about contracts, promotion, and more. With diploma, associate, and bachelor's programs, there's a path for you. Book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Yeah, so there's these basic things. So one of the things you mentioned about producing in Nashville is the availability of a union, a musicians union, which I don't know if that's common in all cities or not, but in Nashville, I really think that Brundlefly likes to come out just when the podcast is happening. It's like, woohoo, party time again.
So,
but
he's a muso.
Maybe a thought for somebody who's interested in entering more into the world of production is go study the musicians union and understand what are the available musicians there. Who can you call? How can you do this? Get to know who some of those folks are. And then if you're in a town where that doesn't exist, I think the equivalent would be, you got to know the local musicians. You got to know who's good, who's reliable, who can show up when you want to assemble a special, session or something like that.
Yeah, it's a profession. I mean, it's art, but it's the music business. So it's music and it's business, and it's a profession. And I agree. I mean, I try to work with people again with the trust of saying that it takes money to compete.
Yeah.
It just does, just like any other business venture, someone opening a restaurant somewhere or whatever. And, if you want a product, you want this end result of this music creation to be something that you're proud of, you may not hit it like on every cylinder every day.
Right.
Maybe things you have to redo, or that didn't work, so I'm going to have to recut that song a different way or something. And you need to have resources in order to do that.
Yeah.
And certainly people should get compensated for what you do, or you can't do it. You can't keep doing it.
Right.
I mean, if you don't have some success, then you can't afford to do it. So I think, it's just good to just, learn your craft, see how other people are doing things. I've kind of defined for myself, my way of working, like I said earlier, is very similar to how I've always worked. I'm very aware of the fact that there's a lot of different components that make up the entertainment industry. Okay. So I've kind of, not say focused on, I'm just going to be a mixer, but I've maybe focused on, I work with live musicians and more organic approaches to music. And that's kind of my niche, I guess I would say, And so I'm not really a programming person. That's not really what I do. In fact, when my early days of engineering, if you were hired as an engineer on a project with, we were talking about Fleetwood Mac earlier, or REO Speedwagon or something, oftentimes the engineer that recorded also mixed. So it was kind of later that, famously, maybe even like Bob Clearmountain kind of started specializing on being the mix engineer.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of become its own specialty, but it's not, necessarily always the case. I've always preferred mixing the stuff that I've recorded because I felt like, well, I have an in because I've been there for the whole thing.
Right.
Getting people to send me stuff to mix, I have to do a little research and find out like,
what's the song?
Yeah. What do you want?
Work?
What do you, what are you looking for here? Because, you probably did talk about it during the recording process and I wasn't there, So it's just different ways to look at it. It's all creativity.
Yeah. Well, cool. And I've had a handful of opportunities to be strictly a producer with somebody else engineering and opportunities to work with other mixers and stuff. And what I've learned in my experience is that I love it. I love being able to just focus on the music and interact with the artist. Mm-hmm. It's a blast. It's so much fun to, when I hear as an engineer initially, of course I'm going to hear stuff in the sound, and it's easy for me to just verbalize it. Hey, I think let's tweak that a little here or there. So that is a great experience. I also love working with mixers, but I think I prefer one versus the other. I prefer when you can work with a mixer and you can come into the mix room and do like the final closeout approval of the mix or any revisions side by side, or versus the internet approach. Although I think the internet approach works too,
Well, it does now. Again, after all these years, and all the listeners out there, my recommendation is kind of evolve and define what works for you. It's art. I don't think music needs to be done the same or sound the same or anything. I can verbalize what I do, because even as a producer, I have a engineer, co-pilot, Kyle Hirschman is his name. And Kyle in the last few years has pretty much worked with me, exclusively on all my production projects. And he's a fantastic engineer. And I'm really fine with, letting Kyle make engineering decisions and everything, but I still do all my mixing.
Right.
I haven't really,
you built a nice mix room too.
Yeah. And so I don't know if I really see myself handing off mixing to someone else. Not that they couldn't do it, but I guess I'm just so used to working that way. The disadvantage would be that it is helpful when I have I'm working with artists, that I can have them as a little bit of a soundboard, because you do get a little bit, what's the deer in the headlights sometimes with your work, where you if you don't have someone else to give you an opinion on, whatever it is, do you really think the piano should be that loud or something? It's sometimes I have to get away from it myself and come back to mixing so that I feel like I'm objective. So that would be an advantage. Like when I'm working with other producers and I'm mixing, they come in at the end of the mix and they'll say, fresh ears and everything fresh. They go, no, do this, and this, and then it'll be right, And I go, oh yeah, that's great, But
I remember learning that early on in the studio. I think initially I was used to working with groups of peers. Mm-hmm. And so everybody's in there and everybody's opinions, you're opinion fighting, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody walks in and they make, that maybe in our band, it was probably the singer, he's probably off doing something. Then he walks in and he's like, you got to do something different. And then, I'd be irritated. And then pretty quickly I learned that the fresh perspective on what you're doing is crucially valuable. It's so valuable. So like, rather than ever being put off by it, it's like welcome it and encourage it. It's great to have somebody not be in the room while you're doing something so that they can walk in and give you a quick take on it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's hard to describe, really. The creative process of recording music is, there's a lot of tension, honestly, between different people, because everybody there has an opinion. It's comical at times, when you think about working with bands, and every time someone walks in, they're only going to hear their instrument. Mm-hmm. So I had a friend who's no longer with us, unfortunately, that he worked with a lot of bands and some pretty big names, and he would joke around and say, the first thing I do is just push all the faders up to the top and then invite the band in and say, okay, who's going to be the first one for me to pull down, because eventually that's what you end up doing. It's like, you got a good mix going, and then the singer comes and goes, well, I can't hear the vocal, we need more vocals. Okay. So you push the vocals up, then the drummer comes in and goes, man, the drums have lost all the punch. Got to push those up. And then bass player comes in. Oh, we got to have more bass, it's like, got to have more cowbell, and it gets comical at times, which is another, aspect that I enjoy, I suppose, is that at some point, someone has to be the calming force in all this to try to be diplomatic, because even going back to like, all these major bands, Beatles, Queen, Rolling Stones, some of the stories are funny, the Police, of the tension that's happening where people are disagreeing, and you have to somehow get to the finish line.
Yeah, and you think about certain classic records as just being correct, and then you're like, how could there have been tension on that? How could they have not agreed that was great,
Yeah, but trust me, a lot of the stories you hear and everything are very real. It's really it's really just difficult to describe, but that is all part of it. And, because what we do is supposed to be art and creative. So if it just becomes like a cookie cutter thing, which it has in a lot of, music, which is kind of sad to me. There's a lot of music that in different genres, I go, man, it just sounds like so many people are doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah. I don't really think that that's the best, the best for all of us. I think people kind of having their little bit of tunnel vision and creating their own music, writing their own style of songs is healthier.
Yeah. Do you can you recollect any moments of tension in the studio?
Oh gosh,
that are worth sharing without throwing anybody under the bus?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't want to get in trouble here. There's probably so many. I'm overwhelmed with the question. Oh gosh. Yeah, tonight.
Go back to the 70s. No, go back to the 80s. Pick a decade.
Okay.
How about the 90s? How about going from analog to digital?
Well, where we got into some, issues there, I guess would be, I'm not going to pick any names.
No, we don't need
names.
We just like the stories.
But I'd say we're just, where things maybe, I said we were kind of, especially when we were making transitions, from the analog stuff, which, when I started in the industry, 16 track was pretty established. Tape machines, tape recorders was 16 tracks.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it was, when the Beatles were recording famously, it was like, 2 track, 3 track, all that stuff. A lot of music was, completed in mono. And the first studio I ever walked into, actually, I'm going to go back here a little bit, because the first studio I ever walked into was actually Sunset Sound in like 1970, I think. And I believe they had just gotten an 8-track recorder. This was
how far back does Sunset Sound go?
Well, I visited it for the first time in 1970, so it was before that, but I don't really know.
Yeah.
I don't think it was very old then,
Right.
But I think the Moody Blues were actually recording there when I got to visit it.
Oh, wow.
And somebody just took us around and let us see the studio, I was in a high school band thinking we were going to go in and record, and, we didn't have any money. It was, they had like, bands like Led Zeppelin and stuff, it was... the Doobie Brothers later. It's kind of funny thinking back how, foolish we were, but got to see the studio. And I think they were just even then just going to 8-track. So then as I was starting to kind of get where I could work at a studio, I think the first studio I worked at was, I think it was 1973, was Radio Recorders. And by then, studios had 16 tracks and 24 tracks.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of moved quickly. And then we were 24 track for a number of years. And then, the lockup, sync systems were coming in from the film industry, where you could lock up like 2 24 tracks and have 48 tracks. And that was pretty amazing. But then when you're talking about like the 90s and everything, where there got to be a little bit more tension going to the studio was where we would have these different formats coming in, trying to get into the digital age, even before Pro Tools, which I recall being like in the mid 90s. And, people were experimenting with, I can do this at home with ADATs, and, we can, all these different, forms of recording. Well, then you'd go in the studio with someone's tapes, and, you'd have to transfer this stuff to other formats.
I remember.
And there was a lot of like frustration and things that wouldn't lock together, and so I remember some times where we'd be trying to get some work done, and then the machines would mess up, and that would cause friction and tension, and
those ADAT machines.
Yeah, and you'd have 6 of them running simultaneously, and then getting a beautiful track recorded, and then 2 of them would stop in the middle or something, and so without really kind of going into any stories about any particular people, I could just say that in general, even stuff that when you hear the finished product, you go, oh, wow, that just sounds so perfect. Well, there was a lot of tension sometimes getting there, and some of it was because of equipment failures and all that.
Right.
But I think it's a lot smoother now. I typically record in Pro Tools, even though I actually use Nuendo in my mix system.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, I have Pro Tools, but Nuendo is what I've used for many years, so I mix with Nuendo. But Pro Tools is my tape recorder, and that works really smoothly now. And then I take my tracks home and I import them into Steinberg's Nuendo system, and that's my system of choice for mixing.
How similar or different is Nuendo from Cubase?
It's really the same thing. Actually, Cubase is really promoted. Nuendo is really just their flagship model. Mm-hmm. Cubase does everything that most engineers and producers really need. Nuendo does some things that are probably a little bit more you hear about in the film industry. Mm-hmm. It's more elaborate, more expensive. I've just used Nuendo for so long that I just stay with it. But yeah, I have a Cubase system too, and it's very similar, and I probably could just keep upgrading Cubase, but I don't,
Yeah. I'm always amazed by, the variety of DAWs that are out there, the DAWs, that you can choose to work with. And I haven't spent much time at all in Cubase. But when I see it, I got a good friend who's got a YouTube channel that's focused entirely on that. Chris Salim and mixed down online. And I'm always amazed, like it has so many great features in it,
you know, there's so many that are great now. In fact, Harrison has is it Mixbus, I guess, system I started playing with, Universal Audio with Luna. I mean, there's so many great systems. To me, it's kind of become a little bit of a personal flavor, maybe like what kind of car you drive. Right. You and I drive Teslas, and you know, before that I had Lexus, and you kind of get into like, well, this is just, you know, I'm kind of into it. It's not necessarily that one's superior. It's just like it's what I'm comfortable with.
Kind of like choosing a guitar, except that with choosing a guitar, you can pick up a different guitar pretty easily. With choosing a DAW, you pick up a different one. And you're like, I feel like my left hand, you know, is tied to my right foot behind my back.
Exactly. That's why I've chosen. You know, I'm always like an open book. I recognize a lot of these systems are great. For someone starting out, they really should just try several and see what they feel is best.
Yeah.
I don't have the capacity to learn 5 or 6 different DAWs.
Yeah, I mess around with learning them, but it's hard. I mean, like literally I'll learn the quick keys on something. Yeah. Even just doing this, you know, I had to go learn Premiere Pro for video editing. Yeah. And so then once I started to get the hang of it, it's like, oh, I get it. I get how this works now, you know, and everything. I learn all the quick keys. Then I come back to do another video and I'm like, how did I just move to the beginning and go from here to here? You know?
Yeah. So
that stuff it gets frustrating, I think, at times. But at least now, you know, with, you know, a Google or a ChatGPT, just you can have your phone next to you. And I just say, what button do I press? And it just
I do that a lot and watch a lot of YouTube videos, you know, but even at that, I stick with Pro Tools and Nuendo just because, well, you know, there's actually another factor to that for me. My historic reference for all this was learning to record, having the good fortune to work under some master engineers, you know, recording and mixing, everyone from Al Schmidt to Humberto Gatica, like you said, you know, and Reggie Dozier, and I'm going to go on and on, Roy Halley. There's, you know, it's really so many. But where was I going with that? Let's see. So we were
working under all these engineers.
Yeah. So, you know, working under all them, I got to kind of just pick and choose like how they did things. But what was kind of interesting about those days of recording the 70s and 80s is you did have to know about different consoles.
Right.
So sometimes it would be like in the morning session, you'd be working on an API console. Then in the evening, you might be at another studio doing something with a Trident console.
Yeah. And
then later, you know, SSL. I became a really big fan of SSL. Actually, even Harrison has a new, they've repurposed their console, the 3232. And I'm really fond of that because I worked a lot on those and like around in the late 70s, early 80s. Yeah. But what was interesting about all that is the way we recorded is we would record at a studio, and then if you did move to another studio, you were doing additional recording on a different desk. And so the only thing, so you had to start over. So when you go to another studio, you basically, all the faders are down, everything's zeroed, and you kind of start putting up a mix. Yeah. So nothing was permanent. You know? Now, if you stayed at the same studio, you kind of got to where you'd have your strips, you know, like where all the channels were, and you could kind of get that a little bit more focused. But ultimately, most of the time we ended up mixing at a different studio. And if you mix at a different studio, you start it over. I mean, you just bring your tape in and you put your tape on the tape recorder and, you know, the 2-inch tape, and then
build a mix, right?
And you start to mix, and it's a clean slate.
It's kind of a fun way to do it. I felt like,
and I still do that.
So, I felt like I remember like you really learn the song because you've pulled up the mix so many times. You know what's going to work.
But you're not like it's like I used to like associate it with like in the early days of like video cameras. You know, if you had the video camera staring into like this room, eventually you could put a paper cup over it or something, and the camera would still show you the same image. People could walk in front of it and everything. Right. It's just frozen. And that, I think you can get like that too in the production process, mixing, engineering, and all that, where you're so used to it a certain way that even if you try to do something different, you keep going back. So what has worked for me, I mean, it's just my way of working, is I record at other studios and we're always using Pro Tools and kind of really hardly ever do anything on Pro Tools, plugins or anything. Just might be on the desk if we work there for a week, might do some monitoring EQs or something. But ultimately, when I'm done with the process, I take these consolidated files and I import them into a blank new window session, and I start mixing as if it was like on a 2-inch tape in the 70s.
That's awesome.
And it works for me because I feel like, I know what I want to do, but now it's a clean slate. I'm not married to anything, on that.
That's awesome.
So that's just, so it's one of the reasons why if I was on Pro Tools, I'd probably just take the Pro Tools session and keep building it and then bring it home and just continue building it. So
rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring Contact 8 and expanded hardware integration. Whether you're crafting cinematic scores, EDM bangers, or experimental soundscapes, Complete 15 gives you industry-leading synths, sampled instruments, and creative effects to bring your ideas to life. Contact 8 introduces powerful new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth textures in real time. And with Machine 3 now available, you'll enjoy even tighter integration with Machine Plus and the latest NKS-supported hardware from brands like Akai, Korg, and Novation. Plus, Complete 15 features revamped Massive X, Guitar Rig 7 Pro, and Isotope 11, helping you shape, mix, and master with ease. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Bob Bullock, joining us here at, I don't really have a name for the studio yet, so I need to come up. What should I call this studio?
Oh, boy. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I could tell you a little funny story,
Bobcast Studio. No, I don't know.
I'll tell you, I can tell you a quick funny story. So I was working with Mutt Lang. We were doing Shania Twain stuff, and he'd built this beautiful studio up in upstate New York. And there's a whole story behind all that. But anyway, the story goes, he called it Reach Sound. The story goes that his accountants, I guess, called and said, we need a name for the studio, and he didn't have one. To him, it was a home studio, but it was, beautiful. And I guess there was some dental floss sitting on the desk or something, said Reach on it. So he said, how about Reach Sound? So I guess it's kind of similar to the Rolling Stones. They said, we need a name for the band. And I don't know if you heard that story. And they had a Muddy Waters record laying on the floor called, Rolling Stone. And
really,
that's how they gave their name. Wow. It wasn't any more complicated than that, And so, you just have to find something, I guess, on your desk or whatever.
Well, the moment we sat down, Brundle flies back, so maybe it's Brundle Studios.
Yeah, it could be Brundle Studios, yeah. So, yeah.
Hopefully
I noticed, he wasn't
fly right into my eyeball or something.
So anyway, I guess, he doesn't have to be really thought out.
It doesn't have to be.
I called mine Cool Springs Mix because I'm in Cool Springs and, so maybe
I'll come up with some. So we were chatting during the break there for a moment about movies and Atmos and all that kind of stuff. And then you just mentioned something. You said, our cars do it. So you and I both have a Tesla Model 3, I think different years. I was going to bring it up just because I love the sound of the stereo, which is actually why I got mine.
Mine too, yeah.
I just was in the used car lot, hopping in different cars. I always try the stereo before I drive it to find out if I'm going to like it, And then I sat in the Tesla and I was like, whoa, this sounds great. So I'm sure there are other cars with really great sounding stereos that I would have loved too. But what do you think about that? Do you still do car references? Do you still listen to your mixes in the car? Do you find that useful?
Oh, that's a good
process too.
That's a good question. I mean, over the years, of course, like everybody, we try so many different things. I grew up in the time when we even have FM, radio transmitters, so you could, see what it sounded like on the radio before, all that, and different speakers and headphones and all that. I tried to get to a point where I just didn't completely confuse myself all the time. and tried to get away from doing the car references. And especially with the Phantom Focus system, I mean, I feel so confident with it that I feel like at any level, low, middle, loud, the accuracy is going to be pretty good and translate pretty well. I started in recent years going, well, I'm going to go to the gym. I think I'll just listen to my mixes on my AirPods. That's a reference. Trying to, keep in touch with, how are the end users listening? Of course, most people aren't sitting there in a studio with Phantom Focus systems. And then the cars, except for many, many years ago when I actually had, a couple different cars with custom systems in them, the cars have never really been very satisfying to me, and a lot of times I go listen in someone's car and I go, well, now it sounds like the bass is too heavy, but then I realize, everything sounds like that in this car,
Right.
So I don't know if we have the same system or not, but I have the, I guess mid 24, refreshed version of the Tesla Model 3.
Right.
And it does have the, it's the long range, so it does have the upgraded system. That to me is the best sound system I've ever heard in a car.
Mine is a long range too.
Okay, it probably is the same.
And I think of it as whatever I didn't ask for anything special with the stereo. I wouldn't offer that, but I love the way it sounds. It's
well, it probably came with that package because there's not a whole lot of options. Yeah. But if you get the basic model, it's one system. If you get the long range, I think that part of that package is you get the upgraded system with the subwoofers.
Yeah, it's got the subwoofer. And I've tried to blow it up, but I haven't yet.
Okay, well, what's funny is it's the first system I've had that I can actually listen to stuff in there with everything flat. This sounds really good to me. Every time I try to tinker with it, I go, I don't really need to do that. It really sounds good.
That was exactly my experience too.
So I am now listening to my, things I'm producing in the car as I'm driving around, and I'm satisfied. I go, wow, this sounds good to me. And of course, one of the things that's improved and all that greatly is, I can play stuff off Apple Music, just load it in Apple Music or whatever, or Samply or something. I can play stuff direct right in my car. The old days you had to, burn a CD and then go play it in, or before that a cassette or something. So, I've tried to simplify. Now my work is primarily, if I'm happy with it, in my room, even at lower levels or whatever, then I'm good. But then, I might listen to something on AirPods and go, well, maybe it's a panning thing or something I might want to do. Or maybe I might want to add a little effect to make some ear candy in there. And then listening in the car is just a way of me, to compare like other music and see if I'm competitive. That's all I'm ever looking for is, does it seem like it fits? I don't think music should sound the same. I'm really artist driven. I think it's okay that, the Rolling Stones didn't sound like Queen, for example. Right. But you want your music to sound like it fits professionally in those comparisons. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. Have you found a clever way to listen on your AirPods while you're actually mixing?
No.
Yeah, I guess I can switch over the audio engine in Pro Tools. No, I think I've tried that and it doesn't work. It says it's the wrong sample rate or something like that.
Well, here's another interesting thing. And again, I don't mind sharing how I do things. It doesn't mean that it's right for anyone else.
Yeah.
But I've never, I used to try to mix in headphones and I never did it very well, you know? And here's why it didn't ever seem to work for me. Now, we're going to probably talk a little bit about Atmos and everything, and I may try to venture out into that a little bit more now, because again, this stuff is moving very quickly, in a positive way, in my opinion. But in earlier days, when I'd say, okay, I'm going to try to just mix this wearing my Sony headphones or whatever, and I would find that I'd get it where I think, oh man, this sounds really great in my phones. And then when I take them off, and of course I had to decompress, because if you go from headphones that are right here, to your speakers up there, everything's going to sound terrible.
Yeah.
But then even after decompressing, I'd go back and now put on the speakers, and the reverbs would seem wrong.
Yep.
panning didn't seem like it did to me in the headphones. And I say, it's like it just doesn't work for me. Now, if I mix something and I'm really happy with it on my system, and then I put on headphones, most of the time I go, oh, wow, that's good, Yeah. And so it's like I get to, the end result works. Same thing with AirPods. I think, that's kind of become my headphone, like if I'm walking around and I know a lot of people listen to music, with those. And I don't have them where they're like following, my direction and all that. They're all just stereo,
Yeah.
I find that maybe what I notice is I'll go, maybe a little less reverb on the drums, might make them a little tighter sounding. As I said earlier, maybe some panning things. But it's usually just really subtle. Might be, maybe that solo guitar could come up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Well, and headphones have a different experience about the center image too than speakers do, I find in headphones, I'm more inclined to accidentally turn up the center image too much, like the vocal level. Yeah. Because I did a lot of mixing in headphones at my Bonnaroo studio for 15 years. So everything was mixed in headphones. And I really love those Beyerdynamic DT70s, the 770s. And I use those all the time. And then there were times where I tried to mix with those in the studio where I was like, ooh, I can really hear the gate setting on this drum. Yep. And I get super tweaky with it, and I'd set reverbs. I'm like, that just sounds great. And then I, just like you said, I'd flip up to the speakers, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, maybe it works for other people. It's just like for me, at least to date, I don't know what the future is because all this stuff is advancing so much, But it's interesting. You can really make yourself crazy, trying to hear everything on every system and all that. And believe me, I was among the people that did that. But I've tried to just, I can't control what, every way the end user listens to the music that I create,
And especially now with Atmos, we were talking about that too. It's this flexi format. Yeah. So it adapts to whatever anybody does. Yeah. So you really never know what your target is, 100% on that. But you mentioned something. You said, did you think that our car is supposed to be able to?
Yeah, my system does play Dolby Atmos, and
I'm trying to.
It might be different.
Looked at it. It has like some kind of spatial, or I forget what it calls it.
Well, that's what Apple calls it. They call it spatial audio.
Well, the Tesla also has like their own slider. And I've just found it confusing, which is the unfortunate thing in that whole world of immersive and stuff is there's a lot of it that it just leaves everybody kind of scratching their head about like, what am I hearing this now?
Yeah. Because the Tesla has like auto or standard or off, for Atmos. I usually leave mine in auto. Yeah. I've listened to spatial music off of Apple Music for one. And I don't know how different that is from actual Atmos, but I know that's kind of their take on it.
Right. I think it's essentially an Atmos playback just through their not renderer, but maybe it is renderer. Okay. It's through their algorithm.
Okay.
But now I've also done things with that where I was like, am I really getting Atmos in my car? Am I getting immersive? And then I just went and played like a stereo track or something else, and I'd flipped the slider in it, and I was hearing a difference. And I was like, okay, I think maybe it's just trying to fool me.
A pseudo thing?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It's hard to know.
I'm not sure either. In fact, that's an interesting thing. I mean, I was telling you earlier when we weren't, on the program that I'm kind of a movie snob, so I try to only go to movies that are either at an IMAX or a Dolby, actually a Dolby theater, really. I love the Dolby theaters, and I love the immersive sound. I've always been a fan of surround sound, everything. Yeah. I haven't done any Atmos mixing of any of my projects because I haven't really found the justification yet, for the added expense and to do it. Now in the cars, I've got a car that can play back a spatial audio and all that. Although the sound system is so good, even with stereo work, that it fills the space. So I will say that. So like you're saying, it's kind of hard to define. Like if I listen to something that Apple says is spatial music, I can't say that it sounds that different to me in my car, really.
Right.
And at home, that's an elusive thing. Not very many people have a, immersive system. A lot of people now have like 5.1 systems and sound bars that kind of generate a pseudo Atmos experience. But for film, television, all that, I love all that stuff, and cars. With my clients and my work, I haven't really. It's come up a couple times, but no one's been able to justify the added cost to do it.
Right.
And
to go have it mixed in Atmos somewhere. Yeah.
And that gets to where we were talking. If I were to do it, I'd have a couple options. One would be, and I've had this discussion with Carl Tatz, one would be to convert my room to an Atmos room. It would be a pretty sizable expense.
Yeah.
With the quality of components that you and I use and everything.
Yeah.
The other is to look at the, and I'm forgetting the names now, but the headphone systems to mix in Atmos. I basically have the engine for that, even with New Window, for objects and panning, so I can do that. So one thought I had, just talking kind of just openly, is I could maybe start a mix that I'm working on in an Atmos environment with object selection and everything, and then take a few songs to somebody who's more skilled and experienced than I am on Atmos and fine tune them with their help.
Yeah. I was just talking to Justin Gray about that yesterday, actually. It'll be last week for you rock stars, but, which is why Brundlefly is still flying around. iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Check out the new iZotope Catalyst series featuring Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Powerful tools designed to supercharge your mixes with intelligent processing. These innovative plugins give you dynamic control over saturation, reverb, and delay, effortlessly enhancing excitement and clarity. And now Neutron introduces new modules like Clipper, Density, and Phase, completing your flexible, fully equipped mixing suite. Plus, the new AI-powered Mix Assistant helps you create a custom signal chain for your audio, referencing professional instrument profiles or your own examples, with easy macro controls to dial in a perfect mix. Use the coupon code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, Neutron, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. But we were talking about that idea of starting an Atmos mix in a more of a home studio setting, maybe even in headphones, and just getting things just generally like, this makes sense to me. And then sending it off, in his case, sending it off to Justin, and then he can do it in a proper Atmos room, and that can actually be streamed back in binaural to the headphones to whoever's producing or back to the studio. It's a cool concept,
Yeah, and that's the trust thing. In my case, in yours too, but I mean, living in Nashville, I could just, attend, that I could go and attend it with them and just be the producer maybe. But there's still, there's a lot of potential for experimentation with Atmos. I mean, you're able to put music, all around you, above you, all around. So I don't think, for me, I don't think that all music lends itself for too much gimmick type stuff, but I think all music benefits from having a sense of depth.
Yeah.
So I remember years ago, even when 5.1 kind of was becoming, a standard, that I heard, who mixed this? It was a Bonnie Raitt live record that I heard at a 5.1 studio, that the music really, and her and the band were really in front of you on the stage, but you had the sense of the audience and everything around you. And I thought, no, that's cool too.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like, the hi-hats behind you or the sax players to the, left of you or something. It was like they just used it as a fullness. And I thought, well, for some music, that's probably, even for Atmos, my idea of like having the expansion of height and around me, but not necessarily, music going all around me. But then there's some music, of course, if you're talking something similar to like a Pink Floyd type.
Right. You'd love to have it coming from every direction.
Then it's illusion.
Yeah. And EDM, electronic music too.
Yeah.
Same thing. You want to have a real immersive experience.
To me, I kind of categorize it in like two types of music. And this was, I actually heard this from Bruce Swedien, the late Bruce Swedien, one time, from being in, part of all the Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson stuff. And it made a lot of sense to me because he said that to him, music was either like you're trying to recreate like musicians, a band or whatever in front of you, which is like our stereo image now, not like the drums on the left and the vocals on the right or something, but of like experiencing the stage and the band. And then even in stereo, trying to get some depth out of it anyway. So you feel like the ambience of it kind of comes out. And then the other type of production is illusion, and that's the stuff we're like saying like EDM, everything where now you're just creating an illusion and it's magic, a magic show. And now there's nothing wrong with having, the trumpet player start, far or, front left and then be, panning back and all that. Cause you're creating swirling, you're creating illusion. And then that's like an open landscape. And that's the same thing with films. With films, you get to create, like you're watching somebody, but you're hearing all the movement and traffic and sirens and things all around you and above you and all that. And that's much more realistic.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And immediately as you're describing that, I'm imagining in my head, I'm like, ooh, it would be cool to do a production where you've got this perfect stage in front of you, but then somehow you also bring all this crazy stuff around.
Well, there is things bouncing off the back walls and stuff, So like when I'm mixing stereo, most of the time I'm mixing music that's not illusion. Most of the time I'm mixing an artist with a band. Okay. Yeah. And so I'm thinking in terms of, I really want it to be like the listeners listening here and they hear the lead singer in the center and they hear the band expand around all that. But at the same time, I feel like, well, my ears, even like in this room right now, my ears hear things that if there's a fly, buzzing next to me or something. So
it's interesting that you say that because I've noticed that about myself too. The more time we spend making records and mixing, the more acutely aware we become of sound locations around us. Have you ever heard a sound and you hear it come from the other side and then like you kind of look for it and you realize it's over there?
Yeah.
And first maybe you're confused and then later you decide, you know what, I'm hearing that reflection off that wall.
Right. So even in stereo, and that's kind of where I was going with it, is you can, create some things where it feels like, some things are bouncing from the back wall or reflections. So when you have the ability with immersive sound and everything, we can like literally place them there.
Yeah.
And you can have like, the snare drum hit, like you feel like it's in front of you, but you also hear it bounce off the back wall. That to me is another really, great way to use immersive sound.
Yeah,
so.
That's going to be cool. Well, now you're going to have to build one.
Yeah, no, I'm saying this. I'm talking. It's getting to be an expensive conversation now, but yeah, I think I was a bit skeptical, and the reason I say that is I go back quite a few years in my career. So I remember when we were all excited about quadraphonic. I remember being at ABC recording studios and we had a Sansui quad system in there and we were starting to do some stuff, I think, with the band Three Dog Night that was in quad, and bands like the Moody Blues had, quadraphonic music. And we thought, oh man, that's going to be the thing, and it, some people bought it, some of the audiophiles, but it didn't really last, and then there was I guess Dolby Digital, maybe. I'm not sure if I have everything chronologically correct, but in the movie theaters we're getting into Dolby Digital, which really wasn't 5.1, but it did introduce like rear speakers,
Right.
And then whatever period of time it was that the 5.1 became like a thing, in the movie theaters, and then was also something people could put in their home theater and apply to music. That was real exciting. And oh gosh, there's even been some others. I'm trying to think now of the names. I've got all these players at home that play back all the stuff that are not hooked up anymore. But they all kind of had limitations for music, not really for film, but for music. And so I think now with the immersive sound, Dolby Atmos and everything, it really does feel like there's it has the potential, to stick, because you can fold it down to stereo. There's a lot of options with that, where you're not having to go out and necessarily buy a bunch of equipment to play it. You have the ability to play the Dolby Atmos if you have the speakers and you have everything. Yeah. But it can still fold down to stereo.
Yeah, which is a pretty cool thing. Yeah. That does make it seem unique to me in terms of what its possible future holds.
So I'm a little more optimistic now, because at first I was going, oh yeah, here we go again. Been there, done that. But now I'm a little more optimistic about the future of it. Yeah. Even my own personal home system, I have a really great home theater, but I have an Denon Atmos receiver, but my fiance won't let me put all the speakers in there, So it's actually a Dolby Atmos configuration, but I'm only set up for 5.1. So I miss, the height and all that. But if I could convince her to let me put the speakers in, then of course.
I think I need to do that. I need to figure out how to make my home living room theater, kind of surround. I've never hooked that up for watching movies at home and all that kind of stuff.
It makes a difference. I mean, it really does. So, we keep evolving. I think the thing we have to be, realistic about in creating music is that, we're not going to really get a lot of people that can sit in the middle of a system, a blank screen, and listen to music and immersive. But if it's with film and visuals, then
with the headphone delivery too,
in the headphone delivery, or in your car, you know?
Yeah.
So that, so anyway, that's exciting, but that's, I've yet to actually do an Atmos mix though. So,
me too. I haven't really dove into it. Mostly because I've just been so busy having other things to do. I got so many other things I have to dive into. But I look forward to it, and I just got recently challenged by my band's record label, Megan Gohill at Gohill Records. He challenged me. He just basically said, "Oh, so now that, because I'm in the process of delivering a first Atmos mix to the label for a client that I'm producing."
Oh, great.
And so that'll be coming soon. And so then Megan said, like, "Oh, so now when we do all your band stuff," meaning my band, so it's all going to be Atmos now. And I was like, whoa, I hadn't thought about that. So now that's the perfect challenge. So I'm like, all right, well, I won't have a system installed, but I'll put on headphones and start messing with it and see if I can figure out a clever way to at least deliver something.
I'll probably, follow that. I mean, I'll probably get to that because it's all exciting to me. You know? And as I said, I've always loved the idea, as I already explained all this, of music coming out of all directions, even if it's just ambience, Yeah. But, it's interesting, that we have an evolution of all these toys and how we can do things.
So let's see. You have some, you were mentioning, so on a previous episode, you had told this great story to us about working with Fleetwood Mac and rescuing the tapes for Rumors and lining up the hi-hats on the left and the right and making sure that they didn't flam or that they sounded like they were coming out of the center. And then I think you were recently saying that you're getting ready to do a new project that's related to that.
Well, it's a little early to say, but this is another interesting background going back to 1975. I guess I was working at ABC for ABC Records. They had wonderful recording studios in I guess it was Hollywood, Los Angeles, and they definitely had. The budget with it being ABC television and all that we had these really great rooms. So Fleetwood Mac had been working on the Rumors album for probably nearly a year by then. Okay. Started up in Sausalito, California. And they got to a point where the analog tape was shedding, and they had put so many hours on it and all that they really thought that the album was ruined. Okay. Well, it's kind of, interesting. At the time, it was recommended, Ken Chesney and Richard Dashit were producing, and it was recommended that they contact a guy named Jerry Ferree at ABC. He was the head tech there. About, we were told that maybe you could help us salvage this by taking the master tape overdubs, the newer overdubs, and putting them on our original safeties, which weren't actually safeties. They had actually, interestingly enough, they had recorded to 2 24 tracks simultaneously at the same time. So they had first generation safeties, which was very uncommon in those days, but it was a blessing. So Jerry, figured there was a way that we didn't have, synchronization or anything like that at all, that we could transfer these overdubs to original reels, therefore save the 24 tracks so that they could mix. And so at that time, it was just, I was on staff. I was one of 3 people. A guy named Bob Diavola was a tech, and Jerry Ferree and myself, and we kind of rotated and took turns once we set this up, which I'll explain. And
well, you've already explained the whole story to us.
You knew all that,
yeah. But it's good to hear the recap too.
Okay, so the recap is that.
Are you ready to launch your career in the audio or entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, right here in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs to prepare you for the industry. From studio production and live sound to audio for film and a whole lot more. You'll learn by doing, working with professional-grade gear alongside experienced industry pros. If you're more into the business side of entertainment, SAE's Entertainment Business Program teaches essential basics like contracts and promotion to help you navigate the industry. With diploma, associate, or bachelor's degrees, there's a path for everyone. Plus, Career Services supports graduates as they take the next step. Want to see it for yourself? Immerse yourself in Nashville's exciting music scene and book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-58.
This was just another day in the life. This is what you're doing, and the producers and the band thought the artist was, they thought the album was ruined, and of course I just thought, Jerry said that this will work, so it'll work, and we did it, and they were very grateful, of course, because we had no idea at the time just how dire the situation was to them.
Right.
And
Did you guys have an idea at the time how important the record would be?
No, because you never do. I was a fan of Fleetwood Mac. I was a fan of Buckingham Nicks, and then I was a fan of the album before Rumors, which was had Rhiannon and Landslide on. So I was definitely a fan. It was a thrill to get to be participating with the band Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have been able to guess like you ever could that that's where I'm going to with this conversation, that now, like 50 years later, I think last year it was like the most streamed record,
wow.
A 50-year-old album. So that's kind of the importance of the story there, is that, who would have known that record would still have the popularity all these decades later. So Ken Chesney approached me about the idea, and I don't know if this will happen or not, of maybe us going and trying to recreate that and put it on camera, so that's what I had mentioned to you, and I don't know if that's going to happen or not.
Meaning recreate the rescue of the album?
Yeah, how we did it so people could watch. Because the thing that's there's a few things that are exciting about it to me. Is number one, it's just so great that that record, is still so well known this far in the future. You can never know that. And the other is that especially for, it's like a behind the scenes thing, or for young engineers and producers. It's interesting how we did what we had to do with what we had at the time, and it worked, but you wouldn't even dream of having to do anything that crude today,
So Rockstars, It's episode 369 was the last one where Bob was joining us, and he explains, I believe, as I recall, like, in detail, how you lined up the hi-hats and rescued it. So it's a great story. So I encourage you to go. We'll try and put a link to that in this as well.
And if
it'll be in the playlist too, because usually we have an attached playlist for your music.
And so if this comes together, it would be fun. I mean, we wouldn't be able to create the same thing. I don't even know if we could get the 3 M79 24-track machines. We may have to just simulate the idea. But it would be kind of fun because basically it was a process of having tapes, 2 tape machines, 1 record ready, and then 1 in playback to bounce tracks, but without any lockup. The only way we could do it was to hear the hi-hat from each tape machine. And we did have slight vary speed. We had vary speed capable on those. Yeah. So to some extent, you could start them both at the same time, and it would start off, the hi-hats would be together, and you could vary speed a little bit. And then when it got to where it was just flanging, you had to stop, scroll back, grease pencil mark, and all that. And so it was a very long process and very painstaking.
And then you like rewind and drop back into record and try and keep them in sync.
Yeah. And then, and it worked.
It reminds me of...
It wasn't sample accurate, I can tell you that.
Right. But it was rock and roll accurate.
Yeah, but it worked.
It was groove accurate.
Yeah, it was definitely groove accurate.
There you go. It reminds me of those times in the studio when you're trying to do like a tremolo guitar part and there's no making as an overdub. Or even in real time. And if somebody can carefully hover on the speed, you can kind of keep it in sync, while you're working on it. Or, even delays.
Yeah. I mean, so many things that we take for granted now. I mean, I used to dream of being able to have something like undo or whatever. But, for people that are interested in the history of recorded music, which doesn't go back that far, really, it's like I remember days where we would we would do like a flanging effect, a phase effect, somewhere in a song. And the Small Faces, I think, famously did that. Itchy Coo Park was a song that they used a phase shift kind of thing. Well, that was like an all-day process to do that. You had to set up tape recorders and literally with your hand, take the flange of the tape, which was the metal part of the tape, and hold it and skew it a little bit so it would make this. It was like 3 tape machines involved in doing this.
It was messing with the speed.
Yeah, messing with the speed, and you would get to do this kind of this. But you had nothing to do it with but your ears and your hands. So the rate that you kind of put pressure on it and everything is what determined how fast or slow that.
That's cool. So it's like it's more of a performance than just pulling up a plug.
Oh yeah, it was an all-day affair.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, and then you would edit that piece in or something, And now you just call up a plug in and say, I think I'll make a phase shift in the bridge, and bang.
I feel like there's a number of things that maybe get lost in the translation to a Pro Tools mix, for example. Mm-hmm. In the digital mix world, we're so used to making an adjustment and then stepping back from it and observing it, right? Mm-hmm. And deciding like, how's that, whereas in the analog mixing world, the song's happening and the mix is happening and you're making the move all at the same time. It's this kind of a no automation mm-hmm. thing. But one of the things that I've mentioned before is I think about delay settings mm-hmm. on a mix. In a console mix, when we were, a lot of times we might have just set the delay and said, that sounds mm-hmm. pretty good. But with a tap tempo delay, when I was doing all these Bonnaroo mixes, mm-hmm. I realized I needed to change the delay times so often from song to song, band to band. There's no way I'm going to dig into menus, mm-hmm. So I just had like a tap thing on the console. And I started to realize, then the band would change tempo slightly during the performance, mm-hmm. and I'd just keep re-tapping it while I was doing the mix. And it made me think about like these elements of mixing that how cool it would be if we could bring back more of that, just the constant performance in a mm-hmm. mix. You press play at the start and you're doing something. In our Pro Tools world, we press play and we sit back because we listen. Maybe mm-hmm. and maybe critique it, or we decide we've already made all the right decisions and now, we even bounce it faster than real time. So we're not even listening, But it's like, do you think of examples of stuff where there was more of a performance through the process of, printing a mix? Or, in recording, you can kind of think of stuff because you're obviously performing on an instrument. Sometimes I'll work with a guitar player, a guitarist is playing, and I'm minting the pedals, and changing the delay times, and you get all these cool results that way. But what are other things that come to mind for you of performing through the engineering process?
Well, lots of things, but certainly before automation and, the Neve NECAM kind of became the first like moving faders thing. And they, those were like your mixing assistants, that came along and you could make a move and then it would, play it back. Then SSL really kind of brought that up to a different level. But prior to that, yeah, absolutely. The way we mixed, and this wasn't until like the late 70s that this was even becoming available, or 80s. You would have, generally a 24-track tape, and everybody in the room, producer, artist, band members, assistant engineer, whoever, everyone, we'd start learning moves. And so as the head engineer and producer were saying, okay, in the chorus, I want, some reverb on these background vocals, or I want to pan that guitar solo when it comes in, or I want this guitar to be on the left here and then the right in the next second chorus, or whatever it might be. Everybody had to learn moves.
Yeah.
So ultimately, and we did this quite a lot. I miss those days, actually. It was very exciting. A mix became a performance.
Yeah.
And it was like, and if somebody screwed up, you had to do it over again. Well, then along with that, because we were always trying to be on the cutting edge, so I'm going back to when, you couldn't do certain things, and then all of a sudden something would advance and you could. So then it got into, okay, we made a mistake here at the second chorus. Let's just stop, roll back, make those changes, and then record that segment of the mix and then edit it together.
Yeah.
So then we got into doing where we'd edit pieces of mixes together. So it'd be like scene changes. Okay. And then that wasn't as difficult because it wasn't like it'd be a live performance on a 4-minute song from beginning to end. If you made mistakes, you did it in segments. But I worked on a lot of records. I did an album with Crazy Horse, the band Crazy Horse with Neil Young and everything.
Yeah.
It wasn't a Neil Young album, but he was on it. But it was a Crazy Horse record for RCA. Forgot what it was called. Crazy Moon, I think. And that I distinctly remember working on an API desk, and we were just doing the mix live, and at the end of the song, main engineer, whoever's, pulls the final fader down.
Right. And somebody's responsible for the tambourine level, and somebody's responsible
and
for
along
the
way, everybody
solo.
were around the console doing things, and you made this live mix. We did that quite often.
Were you guys putting little tape strips and marking?
Oh yeah,
levels,
all those things you could imagine, anything we could. I did some stuff with Sergio Mendes and the Brazil. I think it was Brazil '66. Things like that. That we did the same thing.
You did Brazil '66, the album?
No, it was a later album. There was a lot of albums with Sergio Mendes, but
Okay.
this was one around late '70s. I think it was actually Brazil '78. Actually, I think he called it.
Oh, I might know. I might have that one. I think.
Yeah, because he did albums that kind of were the era, the date. But anyway, this was in the late '70s, and it was those records I remember doing at Kindon Recorders, and we had a non-automated API desk, and you would do things like you'd put grease pencil marks on all the faders, and at the end of the mix, let's just say that you wanted it to end with a echo lingering out. Well, you couldn't just pull the master fader down, so what you would do is you would literally just like pull all the faders down with a yardstick. You know?
Oh, wow.
And then at the end of the song, and then the echo would splash over, and then you would pull the master.
I'm going to get a
fader down.
yardstick for my SSL UF8.
Yeah, there you
digital,
go. Yeah,
digital
we did all
mixing
that, Lidge, you know, and you did whatever you had to. The funny thing is, if you didn't like the mix, then you had to go and you had to replace all the faders back according to the grease pencils.
Yeah,
you know, all that has done to me is hasn't made me lazy at all, because I care very much about every note and everything I do, but it helped me understand that, you know, we would, like you were talking about delays and stuff, you know, we had no way of like tap syncing delays or anything. You'd say, let's put a delay on that guitar, and you would maybe vary speed a tape machine or something till it kind of felt right. I mean, what felt right, it was maybe give or take 20 or 30 milliseconds. I don't know, 10 milliseconds, whatever. You just go, it felt right. Was it clocked to the tempo? Was like this, quarter note 400 at 120 beats per. No, it was whatever my ear told me was close enough or sounded good.
I bet it was the digital delays. It was probably the digital delays that came out in the racks, where all of a sudden you had that little card. It was like divisions of milliseconds for quarter notes. We started getting, and occasionally I still use those, but I honestly still do stuff like, like the Roland tape. What were they called? That you can get plugins for them now. I have the plugin, but the 201 or something.
Yeah, whatever.
The Space Echo.
Space Echo. I had a Space Echo I used to use in mixing all the time, and you literally just turned the knob until it sounded good to you. You didn't know what your tempo was, and we recorded most of the stuff without a click track. I mean, I don't think I really started.
That's cool to hear, actually.
Yeah, I don't think I really started working with musicians doing click tracks until, honestly, man, for me, it was probably getting into the 90s. Most of the stuff I did.
Really?
Yeah, we didn't use click tracks. There's still artists today that don't use click tracks because they're trying to keep that human.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I love going back and forth. I personally sort of have evolved to an understanding of some things are better without a click, some things are better with a click.
Yeah, it's music, and it should feel good.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes, and it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode.
Even though I love having all the tools, and that's kind of why I say I'm one of those people that I could say, even after all this time, I love having the tools available, but I really don't use them unless I'm in a pinch. Okay.
Right.
I don't really care to auto tune or tune people. I mean, if I can get a great vocal out of a singer and not tune them, that's my first choice.
Yeah.
If I end up having to tune a few words, I go, okay, that's still a win. But I really, same thing with all this stuff, it's like I generally, even on my productions, I generally don't like cut and paste choruses and all that. I mean, I use it if this chorus is just better than the other two, but generally I just have people play each part, so there's a little variety in it.
I do that too, and then sometimes I might go and I wouldn't cut and paste the chorus. I mean, if I'm working on loop-based production where it's meant to be that way, I might. But I like doing what you said. And then sometimes I remember, sometimes it's good to go listen to each chorus and be like, this one really does sound a lot better. What's it like if we copy it?
Yeah, and it's easy to copy and paste and do all that. And so I'm not totally opposed to those things. I'm just kind of pointing out that my own style. Are we getting some thunder here?
Yeah, we got a little storm rolling in.
But my own style is to try to keep things as organic as I can, knowing that I have all these amazing tools that can fix things if I need to. But I don't really go in and quantize my basic tracks with the musicians I work with. I don't want to get myself where I've got it so focused on a grid that I'm looking to see that the, kick drum is 2 milliseconds out from the bass or something.
Yeah.
And I start making things sterile. That's just my style,
Well, I've made things sterile before.
Well,
I think
all
it helps
have.
when you've done it, when you've really screwed something up by making it perfect.
Yeah.
And then you realize you don't like what you just did.
Yeah. It's interesting because, again, I keep going back to being artist driven in this music. And I remember even with Cubase and New Window, a demo where they were showing, how easy you can quantize tracks.
Right.
And they took a classic Earth, Wind, and Fire track. It might have been September. I don't remember exactly which song it was now, but they, show on the, the band was amazing, still is amazing, but they were amazing. And, you look at that stuff on a grid and you go, oh, wow, the tempo's moving, but the whole band moved together because that's what they do. Right. And so then the demonstrations, they show you how, oh, wow, you can go in with the DAW and quantize it and it'll all be perfect. And it's quite amazing. It's like couple of clicks and you've done that. And I remember listening back when they're doing the demo and go, well, this technology is amazing. I'll probably use it someday for something. But see, that just completely destroyed an Earth, Wind, and Fire classic recording. So I wouldn't change that recording, And there's lots of examples of that. The Fleetwood Mac Rumors experience kind of taught me that everything doesn't have to be like sample accurate. It just has to feel right.
Did you get on the phone and text, "Hey George, you wouldn't believe what they're doing to your track down here."
But that's the thing. It's like it's good to have the tools, and sometimes we need to pull out of we have a giant chest of tools now.
Yeah.
But I do try to do things more organically. Still, we talked today at lunch, with some people about. I produced a project and got to do some live strings on. Yeah. And it's just, it's just different to me. It's like, we can program that stuff and it's good. It's real good. But there's still a difference when you have musicians in a room all playing and it's just the variances are what make it so special. Yeah,
there's a difference in the experience of listening to it at the end, but there's also a difference in the experience of just creating it. I mean, if you make it all with, it's amazing to be able to make stuff with plugins and, keyboards and stuff like that, but you don't necessarily come home with quite the same memories that you do working with a room full of string players on a session.
That's right.
Seeing their faces, getting to talk to them. I think it's good for us to just remember that the experience of making records together, and what you said earlier, you said something. Oh, it takes a village, right?
Yeah, well, and it does. It's a creative team always. I mean, to me, everybody that's in a control room when you're recording or mixing is participating in some way, and and it's. I mean, it might even sound a little selfish that for us saying, oh, we get to experience. Behind the scenes, all that. But I think that the listener feels that too. I really have always had a belief that there's something more, to music for people listening. And it's like, if it's fun to create, I think it makes a difference in being fun to listen to.
I think fun translates.
And I know the first time I ever got a chance to hear an orchestra recorded, it was at Cherokee Studios in Los Angeles. And I don't remember even what the project was now. I just got invited.
Never got to visit Cherokee. Is Cherokee still?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I used to work there quite a lot in the 70s, but and 80s, I get early 80s. But I was invited to one of the rooms, Studio One or whatever. They were doing an orchestral date, and I don't remember what the project was. Bob, who was the producer, he produced the Four Seasons, but I don't think it was the Four Seasons they were overdubbing that night. But they had an orchestra, and I just remember getting invited through a friend to go and hang out, and couldn't even tell you now who was engineering it. But when they turned on the monitors, the orchestra was out there, running through the chart and everything. And when the engineer opened up the monitors and had all the faders opened up and everything, I just remember getting chill bumps of just, feeling that orchestra coming in through the speakers. And I thought, well, I don't feel that like if I'm sitting there and we're programming some samples, you're still a really good end result, but it's not the same. And
well, it goes back to what you said earlier about that's the version where you're trying to do a magic trick, which can create a different experience.
Yeah. And so I think when you have the opportunity to do this stuff with real people, it's like drum machines. I mean, I've seen so much in 50 years. I mean, I remember when the Lynn drum machine came along, and it was like, well, that's the end of needing professional drummers.
Right.
But then you realize, well, the guitar player may not be the best drum programmer. Maybe Jeff Porcaro did bring something to the table that you're not gonna do with your drum machine.
There's always something. Yeah. I mean, people. I feel like the discussion has shifted slightly in the AI space. About. It was sort of. I feel like the initial discussion about something like AI was like the fear factor. It's going to steal. It's going to be the end of something.
Yeah.
And now it's more about like, oh, here's the cool ways I'm using it,
Yeah, that's my take on it, Lidge. I look at all these things as I can't stop the progress, and so I just have to learn how to live with it. And so far, and that's kind of what I've seen. I mean, there's some things that I can reminisce about, like in the 70s, the excitement of working on a record like with Steely Dan or something, or just, or Fleetwood Mac or whatever, it was. There's so many. But then I look at, but the way what we do today, I just finished a record I produced with this artist, Bucky Hurd, that hopefully is going to be out in sometime in March or April. And, we have all these tools. I still did it in a very organic way, really. But we had some tools that if I wanted to, move something or cut something or recording wanted to undo, I like having that available too,
Yeah.
And so the AI thing is like, there's going to be an audience that's going to not favor, but they're going to accept that as being okay. And it's just like in the pop world, there's a lot of stuff like with in the pop world, it's not really my thing, and it coexists, and that's fine. But I look at like for what I do or what you do, as long as there's enough people out there that appreciate like what we do, that's all I need.
Right.
It's just like famous artists with paintings, it's like it's so many people can live at the same time in the environment.
Picasso didn't appeal to everybody.
Right. Yeah. Precisely, and neither did Van Gogh or whatever, but they did appeal to somebody.
Yeah.
And that's how I look at what I do. I look at like, well, as long as what I'm doing, the people I'm working with, it's appealing to some people, the particular way we do it, that's really all we need.
Yeah. Well, we've come to the end of the show again. But before we go, I want to ask you this question, which I've asked you a couple of times before. I always like to close out on it, which is take the Wayback Studio machine and go back and you find young Bob and you say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself this time? It could be related to anything.
Oh boy. Well, I'm probably going to just repeat because I don't remember what I said before, but I think I've probably already said this even in this discussion, which has been a lot of fun, by the way, for me to do all this.
It's great having you here, man. Thanks.
Well, yeah. I mean, I love it. It's fun to just share all these things, but I think, the most important thing is when I was getting started in the industry, I was really open to trying to learn from people that were older and had more experience. Okay. I think that helped. I don't really have any real regrets. I'd have to say that I feel fortunate that kind of through blind luck or whatever, I did some things that ended up working. I tried to, I did try to, how's a better way to put this? It's never been that important for me, like the accolades or anything. I mean, if obviously you got to earn a living or you can't do it. The fame, all that's, none of that's really been important to me. But I did try to make a point to work where the people that were doing what I wanted to do were. Okay, so let's just say like when I was at ABC Records, there was a strategy to that. A lot of the famous acts of the time were working there. Okay, yeah. When I worked at Kendon Recorders, when I worked at Cherokee, you would be around the people that you wanted to hopefully follow in their footsteps.
Yeah.
So I think that would be advice is, if you're going to school or whatever, that's great. Get an education, learn, and then figure out what it is you want to do. If what you want to do is hip hop, then go where they're making the most well-known hip hop.
Right.
If you whatever that is, country, rock.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice is just get around the people that are doing what you are hoping to do.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. And I feel very fortunate to have landed in Nashville as a great place to be around people like yourself, people who have come here to be dead serious about making music and records and writing songs and hopefully having fun too. Hopefully everybody's not too serious about it.
Well, in my world, everybody I think has fun. I mean, that's what we do. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, and I still pinch myself that I get to, play in the sandbox and do fun things. And then hopefully some people out there like listening to it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Please let the rock stars know if they want to go learn more about you or just contact you or reach out or connect. What would you like them to?
Well, I'm really easy to to find. That's not a problem. My website is bobbullock.net. I'm in the process, hopefully really soon now, of getting it updated. I haven't really done anything with it in many years. There's a lot of music and a lot of things on there that are outdated. So bobbullock.net is probably the best way. I've become a fan of muso.ai for, it really keeps track of, what you're doing and where it's being streamed.
Well, you've only got 50 years of records to keep track
of. I mean,
it's
kind of staggering for me to even go, wow, I guess in 50 years, you can add up a lot of different things. But I think for young composers and producers and artists, I think it's great that that's kind of it's AI, but it's an AI way of keeping track of like where your music is being streamed to help you know where your audiences are. And so I think they have a vehicle of even like Spotify through that. But yeah, really the main thing, the way to get in touch with me is probably through my website.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us on the show today. Rockstars, thank you so much for listening and watching. Please remember to subscribe to our channel and like this video if you enjoyed hearing from Bob. And maybe we'll be lucky enough to have him come back again.
Anytime. So
and I guess I'll just see you around the studio, dude.
Yep. Soon. Yeah. We'll see. We'll be around the campus for sure. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Isotope, Native Instruments, Adam Audio, and SAE Institute Nashville. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes at isotope.com, nativeinstruments.com. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in the show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. And please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way to help support this show. And leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of this interview or who we should have on as a guest in the future. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.